everyone, welcome to this new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the YouTube channel / podcast where I, your host, Carolyn Hayes, film culture critic and journalist, speak to film creators around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm very happy to be joined by writer, director, and producer Lauren Melinda to talk about her short film, Before You, which is, it's a dramatic short, but I think it kind of has a little bit of like almost like horror elements that comes through, especially through the cinematography and the sound mixing, which I love. And it talks about this woman who is looking over her first pregnancy, which she lost, and it's just it's about the emotional toll, that first, the excitement of being pregnant and anticipating a pregnancy, and then being told that there might be something wrong. But there's that sense of anticipation mixed with dread, not only personally, but I think socially. And what comes with that, living in a society where now in America, 21 states have banned abortion. So I think, Lauren, first of all, I think you did, a fantastic job of making it about a social issue without actually making it about a social issue. Is that if you're a woman, and if you're a man who pays attention to the women in their lives and what's happening socially, you'll understand what this film is about. So I have to first of all commend you for that, because it's not easy balancing all of those things.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, it was very important to me to keep this film very human. So to humanize something that's like so often politicized. And so that was very, very important to me.
Talk to me first about I'm actually, before we begin talking about Before You, I actually want to talk. There's another short film that I saw in your Vimeo page, and it's one talking about virginity. And the reason I want to start talking about that is because before a woman becomes pregnant, she first has to have sex. And you're that short, and I kind of see that short film kind of as a lead. I haven't seen that, but I watched the trailer, and it's kind of like a lead into Before You. She would be like the character of Maya, played by Tala Ash. This is who she was before, on her getting ready to get married, you know. So I kind of like see these two characters kind of being almost the same person in a way. So I want to. I know you probably weren't expecting me to start there, but I want to.
No, it's great. Yeah, no, I think that maybe subconscious. I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they both deal with the societal and familial expectations, and how we respond to that. And it's very, I think both films are very internal and subjective. And, while this one plays a lot more with memory, I think that one very much speaks to the dynamic that as a woman she has with her trying to move into a new stage of her life in her marriage, but yet kind of being tethered by the familial expectations that she has coming from her grandmother. So I think, and then obviously in Before You, it's very much her trying to start this new life with wanting to have a child, and then also I think, incorporating the mother's response and the aunt's response, and even the response that she and her husband have together, versus, what ends up happening, and how she kind of navigates that very difficult decision and has to make a decision within the film. Yeah, absolutely. They are similar. Yeah, I'll have to share it.
Because when I was looking at the Vimeo page, because I was like, it made me sit and think about how in particular cultures, like you're a Persian American, and in both films you make sure that you pay homage to Persian culture, and that comes through in the first short film, where she's like her grandmother she has to go through this process of having her grandmother confirm her virginity. And in Before You, she's pregnant, and so the first person she tells, apart from her husband, is her mother. And like she's greeted, and this is one of the things I thought was really interesting about the editing in this film, and like the transition of shots. A lot of it is done audibly versus as well as visually. So like the alarm wakes her up, and then that switches to the son of her mother, ululating, where she's welcoming her in a sense of joy, because ululating is usually done as a way of paying homage to the ancestry, but it's also like a vocal expression of joy. and her mother
Yes,
greets her.
absolutely.
So I thought it
Yeah.
was interesting that audibly, like, she connects alarm, the sound of being alarmed and being jumped out of her sleep, with being welcomed by her mother for something that's supposed to be a joyous occasion. And that
Yeah.
kind of did make me think of how in the short film where the grandmother is doing this, the trailer ends with the grandmother at the door. And I kind of saw
Yeah.
it as like these two juxtapositions. And in a lot of cultures, for a lot of women, like when we get pregnant, the first person we tell is our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, and
Yeah.
like you do that in both of these films. So talk to me about that, because I thought it was just like where you really get a sense of dread that there's something just not quite right. Because even when she's supposed to be super happy, this sound of joy actually means a sound of alarm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's several things happening. One, I think it's the way that memory works and the way, I did a lot of, while this is very much a personal story and, I never had that expectation put on me, luckily, when I was getting married in Before You. That is a very personal experience in which my husband and I did go through the loss of that pregnancy. Due to an abortion or a choice we had to make in having an abortion. And I would say that the so something that I was doing a lot was building a log, like taking a log before writing the script about how, after I had my daughter, how these memories and kept coming up internally, and physically, and what were the kind of triggers that took me to the experience of the loss, right? So here I was in such a moment of joy and excitement with having a new child, and yet I was constantly being kind of pulled back into the memories of the loss. And I think that there's always this duality, right? In moments of great joy, there can also be such moments of difficulty and loss. And I think that that's true in both of the films. That here is this moment, where she's getting married, and there's such excitement and love, and she has so much love for her husband and for her grandmother, but then there is this expectation that is put on her. And how does she navigate that with her husband, and also as an individual, right? What are the choices that she's making as an individual, and how does it affect the rest of her life, and relationships in her life? And I think I've always, just as an artist, always been really interested in how external expectations affect the way that we create our identities, and the way that we function in the world, especially as women. And when I say external, that I also speaking specifically to familial in these two cases. But I think while it is familial, there's also, and I'm not showing the outside world, it is, as a viewer, we understand that there is that expectation, or there is that conversation that is happening in the outside world. So that's, I hope, inherently a part of the film as well.
Is that something that inspired you to become a filmmaker, like using film as the medium to show all of these external forces and concerns and expectations externally? Because the reason I say that is because you could write about it. You could write a memoir. You could write a dramatic retelling of a story. You could write a song about it. But film is the only medium, apart from photography and painting. Well, you could do that too. You could do photography, you could do painting and use it as a way, and sculpture, all of these different art forms to tell this story externally. But film is the way that you get to audibly also tell it as well, as well as visually. So is that what inspired you to like decide to tell these stories that you wanted to tell externally?
Yeah, I mean, I think so I'll have to give you a little bit of background about me. Okay. So I come from the art world. I started out as a photographer. So I was like living in the dark room in high school. I went to UCLA undergrad for studio art, in which I also lived and spent most of my time in the dark room. And then I went to UC Irvine for graduate school, in which I was hoping to continue my practice of photography. But at that time, things were shifting so much from analog, from being like in the dark room to digital. And I really, there was something that I lost in that transition. I really had a hard time just working digitally, working on a computer. Even the camera felt very different to me. And so one of my professors, actually it wasn't a professor, it was during a studio visit, another artist came in and said, it looks like you are trying really hard to create movement and energy in your work. You know, why don't you try video? And so I worked with my professor, Bruce Yanamoto, who's amazing. And he just kind of gave me almost like a personalized education to film. And you know, by my last year, I was teaching about video art and film. And for my thesis, I decided to make a 30-minute film. You know, I fake it till you make it type of thing. I had no idea what I was doing, but you know, I thought, I was cast 35 people. I had an animal, I had a kid, I had all the things that they tell you not to do. But it felt so great being on set and directing. It felt like being in the dark room again. It was tactile. It was collaborative. As much as people think of a dark room as being someplace that you just, you know, are alone in a solitary room. It's not. When you come out, you have other people who are printing. You're talking about, is this a good color? What do you think of this composition? You know, it is actually a very collaborative art form or process. I would say process. And I felt that again when I was on set, and I felt that because a lot of my photography was very conceptual, that the transition to filmmaking was actually quite a smooth transition. And so I think that that's where I came to find my love of filmmaking, and why I found it to be also open. It also opens people up to conversation much more than photography does. I think even in viewing an image, it's a very solitary experience. You know, you're usually seeing an image on the wall and kind of internalizing your response to it. Whereas in film, the viewers, you know, they often talk to each other afterwards, or there's more conversation that can be had in film. And not to say that I'm not still doing photography in conjunction with Before You. I'm actually working on a photography project where I'm working with women who have had abortions and asking, you know, kind of collaborating with them to express their own experience of the abortion and helping to kind of build that environment for them. And then whether it's a true portrait or more of a something that we create together, a still life that we create, and also working with men about their experience of abortion as well. So I think, yeah, that's a kind of a long answer, but that's how I got got myself to film.
No, it's not a long answer, and I love that you were so detailed, because it made me think. One of the reasons that I love doing what I do, I say this a lot. That's something I should put on a shirt. But one of the reasons that I love doing what I do is that sometimes I always say that each filmmaker's path is different. No filmmaker has exact same path to someone else, right? Because everyone's life is different. Everyone's paths diverge differently. But there's always something. Sometimes I'll do one interview with a filmmaker, and they'll say something about their experience and something that touches them personally, and one of the reasons that they got into filmmaking. And as you were talking, made me think of the previous interview that I did for the YouTube channel podcast Before Yours, and that was in February, and that was with filmmaker Tala, and it was for his documentary Memories of Love Returned, and he's a photographer as well. And he started as a photographer, so he's a photographer, actor, professor, and producer. He does all of these different things, but for him it was the same thing, because he talked about the struggle of analog photography versus digital photography and making that transition. Because what he did in his film, what his film is about this Ugandan filmmaker who for 50 years took photographs of Ugandan people, and he was using like one of those old box cameras, you know, with just lens in the front for 50 years. That's what he did. And then he stopped because he got ill and he didn't have the resources. And he had literally hundreds of thousands of negatives, film negatives, stored in his house. He had them in like rucksacks and like envelopes and coat pockets and bags and all over it, hundreds of times. No one knew until Natare just was in Uganda. He was making another film, and he just happened to see this photo studio sign, and he went in and he saw all. He's like, "You're a photographer." He's like, all these negatives, and he talked about just how this filmmaker, like one of the reasons he stopped photography is because he couldn't make the transition to digital because he didn't have the resources. So when you were talking about you're having your own struggles of analog to photography to digital, it made me think of Natalia's own situations.
Yeah.
Just making the documentary itself, because it was a challenge for him to like transpose from those negatives to make digital copies for the film, because like the technology is kind of like dying out, right? And I also used to do photography as a hobby. I haven't done it like years. Like I was telling I have my Nikon SLR 90, I believe it is, and I haven't used it like maybe 10 years because the button broke, and I don't have the money to get it fixed, and I have like a reel of film in the camera. And
I've just been sitting in there
waiting to be developed. So as you were talking, I was like, you see, I love doing what I do because I always get to find there's different ways that people do have similar challenges and experiences. And that's yours. And that's your story, you know, like us millennial people, the younger generation, Gen Z does not know the struggle of transitioning from analog to digital. They were born in digital. They don't know, like for us, it was not easy transitioning from analog writing to using computers. It wasn't easy to transition using the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
we got the word. Yeah. You know that's what WW stands for.
Yeah. My daughter's on, she's 8 years old now, but like a year ago, she came to my office where I have like an analog phone, and she picked it up and she's like, "What's that sound on the other end?" It's like she had never heard a dial tone, you know? And I just like, it blew my mind, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is the world we're living in. Like when I was born, my parents still had the one where me, you know, and to me, it was just like, she's never picked up a phone and like had to press the buttons and like had to hear a dial. It was amazing. But yeah, it's, I think we're in a very unique position where we really went through that transition. You know, we know what came before us, we're experiencing what's happening now. And it's, you know, I'd like to say, I think it's just making us all a lot smarter. I don't know. some reason for it.
I agree with you, because I think for our particular generation, millennials in particular, we have such a unique experience that no other generations in the history of the world has ever experienced. The closest would be the Industrial Revolution, but even then, it wasn't as fast as as analog to digital was. Analog to digital was literally overnight. One day I did not have a computer. The next we had a computer, a Macintosh. No, was it a Macintosh? I think it was a Macintosh in our house.
Yeah.
You know, one day in primary school, we had just books, read books, write books. I got to secondary school at the end of that summer. We had a computer class to sign up for.
Yeah, I know.
Right? My mom went from a typewriter to using a computer within the space of like a few weeks in her job.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's wild. It's wild. And so now there are these shifts, but that was the biggest transition for sure.
Yeah, and I think and filmmaking is one of those is a medium that has allowed us to see that happen in real time. And for a lot of filmmakers, they use it as a way to generate the change in generations. And I think both films actually do that, because you talk about the modern and the traditional in with regards to the expectations. Because something that I thought was interesting is for Maya, she's like, I'm 10 days late, you know? And she tells her husband, Abby, played by... we're going to talk about casting him later, but...
Okay.
I'm 10 days late. And there's that instant, she's instantly happy. And she tells him, but then she goes to tell her mother. And her mother is just like happy, but as we mentioned, there's alarm. But then she goes to her aunt. And her aunt does something that I'm very familiar with, because it's something very much in part of Caribbean culture, where she's like, wait to tell people. Don't immediately tell people. And that's, we do that in our culture. We're like, if you find you're pregnant, we're saying, don't tell anyone. Yeah. You know, don't tell anyone, because first of all, there's superstition that people might wish bad on you.
Exactly.
Right? But then also, like, pregnancy is such a volatile and such a uncertain condition for women. where
Yeah.
anything could happen, like, and which is what happens with Maya. And so when you show that, like, and so like you kind of show like the difference in generational expectations, where her mother and her aunt have the traditional expectations of like, we're happy, but be cautious. But she's
Exactly.
like, I'm happy, and they want to tell everyone. And
I
that's
wanted
very
to,
much, and
yeah.
that's very much a newer sense of doing it, because a lot of it has to do with wanting to go on social media and say, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff. Whereas for older generations, they'd be like, keep it close to the vest. So just
Exactly.
talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that you really hit the nail on the head, that it's very much about the difference in the generations, and how, Maya, there is such joy when you are trying to get pregnant and you find out that you're pregnant. It is so, you want to scream it from the rooftop, and I think that there, within Persian culture, and, I know a lot of it, as you said, a lot of other cultures, there is that, the superstition that you need to keep it to yourself, and that's where, even where the ants is, like that. My mom used to always spit on me, and I'm like, why are you spitting on me? And she's like, it's, to keep the evil away, and it was, even though I always thought of my parents as being so progressive, and, my mom moved to the States when she was 7, my dad when he was 16, and but there are these things that linger, these certain cultural, aspects that stay around. I mean, I do it to my girls now. I'm spitting on them, so it's really, I think, yeah, it was exactly that. It's like, what is and I think trying to use it also with those transitions, with the way memory works, with like, what is the trigger, the sound of the alarm clock reminds her of her mom's joyous call, the gilili, and then the talking about Aunt Lena all of a sudden pulls her back into Aunt Lena's room. And also in the shift in color, that the bright, joyous pink that we have in the bedroom when she tells Avi about the pregnancy. And then we go to, I think the orange is also still reflected in, it's bright, but there's a bit of, we're moving away in terms of the color wheel. We're moving away from the pink, and then to the yellow in the aunt's room. We move further away. It becomes, even more cautious, and there's definitely that idea of, beware, of what's to come. And then as we move around, obviously we move through the color wheel back to the pink at the end. But yeah, I think it's so many of us, at this age, I think, as much as we're living between two worlds, as we said, analog and digital, we're also, the traditional and the more progressive. I think, many of us, there's still, it's a large diversity of different stories, but I think many of us, especially in big cities, are living between those two worlds.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I'm younger. My sister and I have a twin sister, we're 42, and like there's still things that we do that our mom taught to us and that we saw our aunties and our grandmothers and our uncles and everyone growing up in Barbados doing. Like, for instance, my mom would always say, you don't put your bag on the ground if you got money in it.
I know, because the money's all gonna fly out, right? Yeah.
So like if we would get in the car, like coming home from school, we'd have our backpacks. I would put it on the ground. My mom would ask me, where's your purse? Is it in your pocket or is it in your bag? She's like, if it's in your bag, lift your bag up and put it on your lap. To this day, I still do that. If I have my purse in my bag, I do not put my bag on the ground wherever I am, or I will take my purse and I'll put it in my pocket. And if I have to put my bag up, it's too heavy. And like when we come home, we put our bag. We have a little bench close to the door that we put our bags on.
Yeah,
because we
absolutely. I'm the same way.
So like there's these cultural things, and like I think for a lot of people especially come from ethnic communities, I think it's so I love when I see these small moments in films where I can see where filmmakers are like, the film may be just about this one issue, but it shows that our culture is still very much tied into how we relate to whatever the issue is. And in this case, it's talking about pregnancy, it's talking about abortion, it's talking about loss and grief, and it shows you like your culture is very much a part of how you relate and how you process and how you get to the other side of this grief and this loss, because your culture is there to help you and your family is there to help you. And I love when I watch films. I'm always so happy when I watch a film and I never know what's going to happen, and I just see these moments and I'm like, precious. Because to me, like, because I watch so many films that are also made by people who are, people who don't come from necessarily ethnic communities. And like, there are specific things that aren't there because they don't have that kind of culture. So when I watch films like yours, and like, I'm always just so happy because I can be like, this is why film is so important, because it shows, I think, not just other people, but people from within your own community, that I still cherish my heritage. I still cherish my culture. I still cherish our traditions. And just because I'm a filmmaker doesn't mean I have to get rid of that. I can use film as a way to show and pay an homage to that, show how important it is to these moments, whether they're of joy or whether they're of grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate
and you talked about the color wheel, and I want to talk about that, because the cinematography I thought was interesting, because I'm not gonna lie, I adjusted the lighting on my laptop because I'm like, is it my lights? I was like, is the color? I was like, does my laptop need to be charged? But I noticed it's because the color does start to slowly desaturate as the film goes on a little bit, because like, it's very vivid. Like, the opening shot is of Maya and Abby in their bedroom, and it's bright, it's light, they're happy, it's eerie underneath the blanket, and they're so happy. And then like the space where the mother wants to transition from the bedroom to the mother's living room happens. The mother is kind of like there's like the back of her is kind of dark. Like, the room isn't that brightly lit, but the mother is so well lit because she has on like reds and like intense colors. And then when we're with Auntie, I thought it was interesting because it's almost like she was in a garden, but indoors. And like the set design kind of made me think of like if they were in an indoor garden. But because Maya has on this light flowy, this kind of soft peach dress. And like, they're just surrounded by, they're not defined, but it just gave me a sense of them being in a garden. But it's almost in a garden of where flowers can have thorns. And and then there's the scene. That's kind of, I don't know why
we talked a lot about it as like almost like a swamp, like part of like, what is this? It's overstimulating. There's so much in there. Like, but they're birds. We used a lot of sounds of birds. There are a lot of birds in the room. They're plants, so it's we definitely, with my production designer, worked a lot as to like, what is the room? Not only does what does Aunt Lena represent, but what does the room represent in this moment for Maya?
Yeah, and so I talked to him about working, because your production designer is Danny Sistone. Sistone. I wasn't sure if it would be the E or if it's Sistone, and your cinematographer is Ludvika Isidori. So talk about working with the two of them to get the lighting and the feel of each I will call it segments, because when you're going through the segments of the color wheel, as you said, like, each of them have a very particular feel and look to them.
So just to kind of explain the thought behind the color, when the entire time that she and Avi are driving to the abortion, and pretty much from the car back into the car, that is all desaturated. It's all grayscale. So we made sure their clothes, the car, everything was desaturated. And we were very lucky to work with an incredible production designer, Danny, who built everything. So everything was done practically. So we got a warehouse a month before we shot, and he built, first he started building everything by himself, and then I forced him to get help because he had built like 30 flats by himself. And so he and I worked a lot together on just looking at, on paint swatches, how would the transitions be, in terms of from one gray space to another. The couch, it was meant to be more flesh tone, to kind of represent more a bodily feeling. We worked so closely together. He is just so incredible. He built the elevator, the walls, like we picked all of the images that would go on the walls. Those were all in black and white. Yeah, so that was very specific. And of course, Ludo and I had a lot of conversations about how to light that, in contrast to, let's call them, just for the sake of it, the memories, right? So the memories, like as I said, started out with the pink with them in the room, and that followed the color wheel. So as the news that she was receiving became, more difficult, worse and worse, it became more desaturated, as well as in the darker tones, the greens, things that represent danger or loss. And then it's a full circle back to the baby's room, which is also that bright pink. And throughout those memories, Maya's wearing a very light pink color because she herself is in remembering all of those moments. So it's kind of the pink that she's wearing throughout those memories is also, I think in my mind, it was holding on to the new baby girl that she has. So as much as those memories hold the present and the past, hold both pregnancies, and in the same joy that she felt at the beginning of the film is met with the same joy that she feels at the end. But obviously we've experienced with her the loss that she's felt. So how at the end we hold both such happiness and love, and also the reality of such loss.
Yeah, the wearing the pink has just kind of like a touchstone throughout. Kind of, it makes sense because it's like your present is always there with you in your past.
Yeah.
Kind of like our past is always there with us in our present,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it makes sense. And like when I started to notice that the desaturation was not my computer,
Yeah.
I was just like, this makes sense, because it made me think, like I have clinical depression, so because I have multiple sclerosis, so the depression is one of the symptoms of my MS, right? And so for me, when I'm having a really bad depressive episode, I can see color, but I don't feel color, in that everything feels very bland and everything just feels very washed out, like I don't have any motivation, and I'll be looking at a color, but I'm not feeling any emotional connection to that color.
Absolutely.
And so when I related a lot to the just her feeling like she's moving through the motions of life, and like everything around her just isn't having any emotional impact on her, and for instance, like for Abby, where he's having intense reactions to things. Like, for instance, they're driving to the clinic and he's having an intense reaction to another driver on the road, and she's just sitting there in the car and she's not processing anything. And I've had that, and that's very much what depression is like for a lot of people. It just feels like you're just there and that everything is just very blah, and it feels like washed out. And like, this is where I wanted to talk about the sound design, because for me, one of my other things when I'm having an depressive episode and an anxiety attack, I lose sound, where sound literally kind of like disappears. And it's very much, I always say the best way I can explain is if you're underwater and you're hearing sound externally, but you can't tell exactly what it is you're hearing. So I wanted to know, we talked about the cinematography and all that, but the sound mixing and the sound design in this film really does play a part in telling us where Maya is emotionally as a character, but also where her memories are. Because memories can be very tricky in like some days. Am I remembering hearing things correctly? Is this what I actually heard? Or is this just is this conversation actually with what's happening here? Is this another conversation I'm happening? Like the scene where she's in the room and she's sitting and she's trying to hear what's happening outside the door. And it's like, is this a natural conversation outside the door? Is this a memory knocking at the door? So talk to me about the sound design and just how that kind of plays into the visual look of the film.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that about your own experience, and thank you for sharing that. And I think that was definitely something that I experienced during the loss, whereas it was the lack of sound was it was as deafening as if it was, somebody screaming next to you. I was very curious and very interested in how we could use silence to be as impactful as if you were to have sound. Because I think that's a lot of times we as filmmakers can use can use sound to help point to an emotion. And it was very important to me that I wasn't overdoing that, and that I could allow the imagery and the performance to take us on the emotional journey, and not have it be solely about like, okay, now you're supposed to feel this way or you're supposed to feel that way, you know. And I think that, and being truthful to the experience, you know. So I think I worked a lot with my composer, Giovanni, who's amazing. This was actually his first film. I had a lot of first timers. Mama and Aunt Lena were both first time actors, and Gio, this was his first time composing for a film, and it was a wonderful experience. He was so open to playing and to seeing how the music affected the different scenes. And I think he said to me after a most recent screening, he said, I always was a little worried when you told me to take the music out of that one scene, but he's like, but you were right. Like, it didn't need the music. And I said, no, because emotionally there isn't, a lullaby going on in her head in this moment. You know what I mean? Like, everything has been pulled out from under her, she is so alone. And when we feel alone, we do not hear the people around us, and so that was an incredible experience working with him. And then the sound design, we worked with 1000 Birds. They are an amazing sound design studio, and we worked a lot on what would be also like, what are sounds that again, like, trigger these emotional memories. So a lot, like the sound of a baby crying, the sound, even when they're in the car,
when the car tire was on the cement.
Yeah.
I was like, was that a trick of the sun? I was like, I like that. Just like,
you heard the baby cry, right? So we were like that, because that's how, when we think about the way memory works psychologically, it's not linear. It's not like, oh, this happened and then this, it's like there are things that we're experiencing in the moment today, even colors that we're seeing in the moment today, they impact the memories that we have. And so how I was just overlaying those sounds and thinking about, where is she in the present while thinking about these moments, and then where was she then, and how do we create a really impactful sound design that kind of is truthful to both of these moments.
Yeah, and I think the sound design is genius. Your film, have you seen a film called Sound of Metal? It was released so your film kind of made me think of that film, because I kind of had a similar reaction to that film, because so that was 2019. And the funny thing is in 2019, I've had a lot of issues. And I don't mind sharing, because I'm always just like, sometimes when I share, I'm like, I might oversharing, but you know what, whatever. But in 2019, I had a surgery to a cranioplasty. So I had a lytic tumor in my scalp. And I have a piece of titanium plate in my head right here. But the reason I mentioned that is because I had seen that film like maybe 3-4 weeks after that surgery. And Sound of Metal is very much has a like the character played by Riz Ahmed. He's going deaf, and he has like tinnitus, and he's hearing like sound very rare. That film, I actually interviewed the filmmaker, and I told him that is legit how I was processing sound at that time, because the titanium plate was actually messing with my perception of sound. And because of the MS, I have like some hearing loss in my ear. So like I told him, I'm like, kudos to you and the sound designer, because that is literally what it is like for people who've been in my situation. And I always say, like, one of the reasons I'm always open to sharing is because people talk about representation, but I always like filmmakers say, like, you got it right. And your film got it right in this sense, because in how you talk about sound and memory is like not linear. It's the same way, like you'll hear a sound and it will just send you back to this moment in time, and you'll be like out of completely nowhere, and you're not like you're just like, how did I get here? How did this moment come? Because a lot of people think about scent or like, for memory, but we don't really talk about how sound is a trigger for memory as well. And for that, like, and the thing is with sound is that it causes us to have a very physical and emotional reaction to it. Because you hear something, you look around.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, whereas if you see something, you won't necessarily react physically, but if you hear something, you'll be like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what happens in this film. So I really wanted to talk. I really wanted to commend you on your sound team for that, because I was just like, oh, this film made me think of Sound of Metal, which I
Yeah.
love. So like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's a very big compliment. I mean, the sound design on that film is incredible. Yeah,
it
absolutely. Yeah.
amazing film, and I think I think your team did a great job. And in
Oh,
talking about like the memories and all of that emotions, I know we're going to talk about the casting of Tala to play Maya and Adam to play Abby, because these two characters are in two very different places, even though they're in the same. They're in two very different places emotionally,
yeah.
but no, sorry, they're in the same place physically, but they're in different places emotionally, because
Absolutely.
he has processed the loss of this child, and he has his grief. He's carrying the grief with him as well, because he is involved. Like when the color is desaturated, he's there. So
Yeah.
it's telling us, the audience, that this man, this husband, this potential father was feeling grief along with his wife, but he was not her. You know,
Yeah.
like he is not going to feel the grief in exactly the same way, because she was one that was carrying the baby. And so you have to have two actors who not only can relate to each other with regards to chemistry, but who have to be able to inhabit two different spaces emotionally at the same time, in the same
Yeah.
space. And the thing that I thought was interesting with casting Adam in particular is that he has this very beautiful smile, you know, and like he's on screen, he's very charismatic, and he has very gregarious nature, and he's easy to laugh, you know, like we see those scenes with him and Maya
Yeah.
at the beginning of the film where they're both laughing. Like you can tell they have a very loving and passionate relationship. But like there's a moment when he's in the car where it's like you can really see how upset he is.
Yeah.
And but then he wants to make sure he doesn't dwell on it, because he has to be there for Maya, where Maya is just like, she's still in it.
Yeah.
She's still moving through it. So talk to me about casting Tala and Adam, because their dynamic on screen is very is cause it's very interesting, because they're two characters in two very different places emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, that was very important to me because, that was the truth of my experience. My husband always says, whether he likes it or not, I'm a truth teller, which isn't always.
Sorry, my dog just came in and she's
Oh, no, it's okay.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And yeah, so it was very important to me, just looking back on how my husband experienced the abortion. It was such a different experience than what I went through. I mean, still to this day, it's a very different experience, and he has um his own very, very deep emotional feelings of loss. And yet, because it's not happening in his body, there is a feeling, I think, of not knowing how he should be reacting, of not knowing what is appropriate or not, kind of constantly. There's anger, there's fear, there's upset, but it's also very confusing because, and his love for me is also causing all of these feelings to be completely overwhelming, and I think that while I actually, I mean, not, excuse me, Tala was the first person I cast. Or no, sorry, the first person on the film before I even had producers. I had Tala, and she was just incredible. The way that she responded to the script I was so appreciative. She really understood the journey that Maya was going to be on. And we worked together quite a few times. I do a lot of Alexander work with my coach, Jean-Louis. And we did a couple sessions together, which I think really brought us a lot closer together and helped us to kind of share in this, because it's very bodily. Alexander is all about movement and the body. And so we really came together and worked to kind of share an emotional truth together. And then Adam, it was really difficult actually to find somebody to play Avi. I think a lot of people didn't necessarily understand that dynamic that he and Maya had in terms of just how they could be in the same place and be having different feelings, but still show a connection. Because there's still, I think, it was very important to me that they were still, that they held that loving connection throughout. And a lot of other people just, I don't think, understood how to kind of hold those two things at once.
Yeah.
And Adam's, he actually has worked with Jean-Louis in the past, and Jean-Louis reached out to him and sent him the script. And, he's a father. He's a very loving husband. He is incredibly emotionally intelligent. And so he really understood it. And we did a read, with Maya, excuse me, I keep calling her Maya, with Tala and Adam, and immediately my producers and I were like, yes, it feels like they're meant to be together. They're married, and then prior to shooting, I did a rehearsal with them where we did the same kind of Alexander work that I had done with Maya. I had them do together to kind of create that relationship. I interviewed them as if they were a married couple so that they could kind of create a backstory. Just try to work with them as much as possible so that they would have that feeling of history together, and so that push and pull, the fluctuation of their energy could be seen throughout the film. I love both of them. I think they really, they went above and beyond, and were incredible to work with.
I think they both did a terrific job because
Thank you.
It's to me with stories like this where you're transitioning from joy to grief and loss, and joy, but then joy in the midst of grief and loss, like that's not easy. And it's not easy to portray, and it's not easy to live as like actual human beings, because well, we are very complex human beings, and some things are we don't even understand ourselves fully. And we are every day we are growing and we're learning about ourselves and how we can process emotions, and I imagine for actors having to learn to put that through in a character as you yourself as a human being is learning and growing, it has to be very interesting and also very difficult at times, because you might react to one situation today one way and go through the exact same situation tomorrow and react completely different.
Absolutely.
And getting that on screen is interesting.
Depending on who's with you as well in a situation, you're going to respond differently, and I think that it was always important to feel that Maya felt she had his support, but she's so lost in her own internal experience that even that is hard to ask for. It's hard to grasp, if that makes sense. I don't know. I know that, like, when I've gone through anything difficult, even though people might be wanting to help or wanting to be there, it's hard to even grasp how they could help you in that moment because you're so lost yourself,
Yeah, you don't have to explain it to them, you don't know, like they can see and they want to help, but you yourself want to reach out, but you're like, I don't know exactly how to get this done. And the thing is like we can explain it externally if it's somebody else. We can say this is what you need to do, but if it's us, we always say like it's easy to sit to show rather than to do. And in a situation like this, like it can be easy. It can be difficult. So I wanted to ask you, like, because you are the writer and the director and producer, and you went through the Alexander process with both of these actors, what was it like for you? Like, again, looking back in hindsight, you in writing the script, I imagine you would have felt different about all of the emotions that you went through during when you first found out about the pregnancy and the excitement, and then found out that the pregnancy wasn't viable, and then making the choice to have an abortion. That's one period as you're living it. Then there's another period, you're writing the script, you're writing the story, you're processing all of that again. And then you're shooting and you're filming, you're working with the actors, and you're just like, that's the third stage of processing and going through it again. And then after it's filmed and made and released, and you're talking with it to different people, to the actors, to the producers, to other people at screens and people like me interviewing you. That's a
Yeah.
fourth stage of like looking back,
Absolutely.
assessing, and doing all of it. What has this been like for you, like through those 4 stages so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's very vulnerable, you know. I mean, I think it's been a real test in vulnerability, you know, and I think that, you know, in the past I've made films that they touched on very personal subject matters, but it wasn't the entire theme of the film, right? Or I was somehow, because it was maybe more experimental, I was able to there was a distance that I could have from the film. But this is, you know, I think the writing was probably very cathartic in a lot of ways, you know, because I was only sharing that with a few people. So it was, you know, as I started to share it with more people, that's when the vulnerability kind of sneaks in, you know, and I had to kind of really consider, is this something that I want to put out there, you know? And I think also I wrote the script before the reversal of Roe versus Wade. So I was working on a couple different projects simultaneously, and that was one of them. And then when the reversal, when the Dobbs decision happened, I was like, women, I need to tell this story, and women need to hear this story. So that's when I started looking for producers and decided, okay, I'm going to make this film a priority. But yeah, I mean, they've all been different. Like even the 3 days on set, you know,
Well, I guess 3 days.
just three. We should have done 4, but it was just 3 days. I mean, we did have a month yeah, it was just 3 days. Yes. So we worked very hard and very fast. But you know, it wasn't the first day we shot all the memories, and those it was lovely. It was really wonderful kind of, processing all of those in real life, you know, and then when we got more to like the hallway or her going into the couch, you know, those were more emotionally heightened days for me, like a day for me. Like that was more of a process. And then yeah, and then the you know, it's been wonderful sharing it with people. You know, sometimes when I don't get into a festival, I do take it a little too personally, but I've because it's such a personal, I'm like, no, they don't like my story. But you know, I think that's something that I've had to learn as a filmmaker, that has nothing to do with that. And that it isn't about my story not fitting. And that when it is seen, I've had so many people come up to me and say, you know, thank you, your story is my story. And I think that's when it's all worth it. You know, that's when it really all makes me feel like, okay, the vulnerability, the pain, the fun, all of it, all of the mishmash of all of the feelings that I've experienced from the beginning till now, they're all incredibly worth it. So
Yeah, and that to me is, and I'm gonna kind of tie it into what we were first talking about with regards to culture, because coming again, certain ethnic cultures, like certain things that women go through, like you know, in our families and in marriages or whatever, they say keep that at home. Like everyone doesn't need to know your business, and
believe
something
me,
like
yes.
like an abortion, it will be something like our elders would be saying, like, why are you telling the world these kind of
Exactly.
stories? And not only telling like people, but putting it in a film and screening it all
Yeah.
over at film festivals all over the world. And like that is another form of vulnerability, but it's also something that kind of goes against what we're taught, you know, like, and that's what also one of the reasons why when I'm doing interviews or even when I write my op-eds and my articles and whatever, I share my personal experiences, because first of all, there's no shaming it, you know, there's no shame in having an abortion, there's no shame in having grief, in expecting and wanting this thing and then having to go through the process of losing it, you know, and like that. And even if there is no one who watches it who doesn't necessarily have the exact same experience, is showing that there is no shame, and there is, and one of our best aspects, I think, as humans, is the ability to communicate, you know,
Yeah.
and like film is a way to communicate, and like telling people what we've been through is a way to show like we've survived it, you know, like I can speak about it because I survived it, you
Yeah.
know, and like I remember I had a hysterectomy again. I went through a lot of stuff.
Um,
I had to have a hysterectomy in 2022 because I had endometriosis and fibroids. And again, like the reason I wrote a piece about it is because like so many women go through these kind of conditions, you know, and like we're taught not to bear the pain in silence and not talk about it. But the thing is if you don't talk about it, you'll never know like how many other women around you are going through the exact same thing.
So many with fibroids and endometriosis. I mean, so many women experience the same thing. Yeah.
And a lot of these conditions are related to a lot of women not being able to have full-term pregnancies because like with PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis, a lot of uterine conditions makes pregnancy difficult and impossible in a lot of situations. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to have a hysterectomy, because having a pregnancy would potentially kill me. And I'm like, you know, and that was a choice that I had to make, you know, and like in my culture, people are like, but you're supposed to have, you know, get married, get kids, have all these kind of things. I'm like, listen, it's about my quality of life versus the potential, you know? And so like, again, like love talking to filmmakers like yourself who aren't afraid of, no, you're afraid because like getting vulnerable is a scary thing. Getting publicly vulnerable is a very scary thing. But I always have to say that it's so brave, especially for women, you know, like, because society to this day still tells us to be ashamed of the way our bodies function, the way our bodies work, and the way our bodies at times betray us, you know. And so like I have to start with a commendation, and I have to like keep commending you because I love films like this, and I appreciate you opening up yourself to other people to be able to watch this film, and not only for women, for men to see like this is what it's like for us. This is what it's like for us in a patriarchal society. You do this.
It's true, and I appreciate how much you saw in the film, and how I'm grateful that it resonated with you, and thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your own experiences. And that's what it's all about, right? It's like opening up the conversation and being able to feel like we aren't alone, and we can share these experiences with people in our lives, and even strangers. And you know, so thank you. No longer a stranger, but thank you.
Because I remember that, I don't think I've heard it in a year, but there used to be this phrase, suffer in silence. And like basically that's what women are expected to do, to suffer in silence, because it's about we're supposed to contain everything to make other people comfortable.
And I don't want to make anyone comfortable with this film, unfortunately, which I'm hoping more people, you know, not that I don't want to make them comfortable, just it is painful. That's the reality. So experience the pain, and you know, and then there's also, you know, a beautiful moment at the end, but there is deep pain that is true, you know. So
and it would hopefully help people who don't understand the reasons why women would have abortions, or just even if it's a miscarriage, you know, like how painful that is for women and for husbands and for their families. And like to tell people like this is something that shouldn't be hidden, and it shouldn't be spoken of, and it shouldn't, because when you think about it, there aren't that many films and TV shows that actually deal with this, you know, and like they don't deal with it in depth and with honesty. Let me see, I'm trying to remember the last TV show that I can recall, last American TV show that I can recall where a character had an abortion was Scandal, and that episode did not handle it very well. So and that was like what, 7 years ago. So
it's not,
so like films like yours are very important and necessary.
Thank you so much.
You know, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time for talking to me and like breaking down everything with regards to like the color wheel and the sound for me, because like I love those kind of details. And like Aunt Lena's, I think my favorite set is Aunt Lena's living room, because like you said, it's kind of like a swamp, and it is. And I was thinking about it, and I was wondering, like, I think what makes that particular set interesting to me is like there's so much happening, but you can't help but focus on the two characters. You can't help but focus on Aunt Maya and Aunt Lena, and as what we're saying, like everything that we're talking about, kind of, I think that one particular set kind of encapsulates, because it's like you're existing this, so many things are happening around you, but you have to focus on this one thing.
Yeah,
both
yeah,
ways. So
absolutely. I love that.
have to say that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. No, this has been wonderful. I'm really grateful for it. So thank you
Thank
for,
you. I'm glad you
yeah,
enjoyed it.
yes, absolutely.
And if you go to TIFF, and if I'll be at TIFF, I hope we get to meet in person at TIFF.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, I will let you know, and hopefully plan the trip. So I will for sure let you know, and hopefully we can, meet in person.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too, you too. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.